You're not going to get drafted into the military. You don't have to pick up a gun and head to Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, or any of those other places where our military is engaged. So it's easy to put the military-industrial complex out of our minds. But while George W. Bush has gone away, the American warfare state most certainly hasn't. From drone warfare to NSA snooping, what Washington does in its war on terror affects you. But what does it cost you? Because ultimately, you're paying for it. It's our subject tonight, the cost of war, and this is the business of life. Hello, I'm Michael Moynihan, and welcome to the Business of Life. Ask yourself a question. How much does the safety of our country cost? Are the trillions of dollars spent waging a war on terror actually keeping us safe? Should we really care what goes on over there? Well, I'd argue you should care, because whether you're in the military, considering a military career, or simply paying your taxes, the decisions of the Pentagon affect your life. And if you don't care, I'm going to make you care. And my distinguished panel of guests are going to help me achieve this goal. So what are the costs and benefits of the American military to our soldiers and to ourselves? As always, we're going to break down the issue using facts, figures, dollars, and cents. I'm joined by a panel of brilliant experts, uniquely qualified to answer this question: what is the cost of war? Spencer Ackerman is the U.S. National Security Editor at The Guardian, where on his first day of employment, he was tasked with informing the government and Verizon that his new employer was in possession of material supplied by Edward Snowden. Anu Bhagwati is a writer, activist, and the executive director and co-founder of the Service Women's Action Network. She's a former captain and company commander in the U.S. Marine Corps. And Sebastian Junger is an award-winning journalist, the best-selling author of The Perfect Storm, and a director of one of the greatest documentaries in war I have ever seen, Restrepo. You should all see it. So let's begin with our first topic, the military-industrial complex, and let's bring up our first number. 1-to-1. That's the approximate ratio of contractors to U.S. service members in Iraq and Afghanistan. Spencer Ackerman, we've privatized our military, have we not?
To a tremendous degree. One of my favorite contractor memories was doing an embed in Iraq in 2007 and going to a gigantic base around the Baghdad airport and learning that we were going to have Alaska king crab legs for dinner. All of this supplied by KBR, that basically is the suppliers for the stomach that any army marches on.
Some person in the military once told me that in Iraq, that KBR stood for kick back and relax. What is the relationship like between soldiers and these soldiers of fortune?
Yeah, there's been a lot of concern among veterans, among service members who have deployed overseas about kind of pushing contractors out there at the front. They're better paid, they're better treated, and they also operate by different rules of engagement, right? I mean, we've seen huge scandals erupt in terms of war crimes, in terms of sexual assault committed by contractors, and it's kind of a cowboy culture that's developed overseas. It's really changed the nature of warfare.
Let's look at one number here. $9,436,834. That's the minimum estimate of money lost per day to waste in fraud by contractors in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is a staggering figure. I asked a researcher who was looking at these numbers to get a total, and it was too dizzying to even comprehend.
I think a lot of that figure comes from, fraud and these huge bases and the oversupplying of things that people don't need. I mean, okay, you can get Alaska king crab on a big base. You can't even get cooked food at an outpost.
The thing that I wonder about is who is overseeing this stuff. I mean, we're now training Iraqi policemen again to fight ISIS. Didn't we already train them and spend billions and billions and billions of dollars doing so?
The money gets spent and it's just gone. The idea is that it serves as a substitute for thinking through what the implications of never-ending war ultimately is. The wages of fighting ultimately become, as a measure of success, continuing to fight, not an achievement. The idea that there's victory in these wars has become a completely obsolescent concept. There's no one even thinks about what it means anymore. Does victory mean staying? Does victory mean leaving? And when you don't even have those basic questions answered, it's really easy to just spend money and decide you're not going to look too heavily at where it goes.
Hi, my name is Emily Shapiro. I'm just wondering, economically, is our military able to sustain the amount of conflicts we're waging abroad?
Military money is not considered in Washington like any other kind of money. It's not something that's subjected to strict cost-benefit scrutiny. It's something that appears. The question is whether the United States will spend that money on people within the military in order to sustain, as we've been talking about this, the human cost of wars that are now basically 13 years and ongoing. If the military has a tactical sustainment need, that need will get sustained. Whether it will care for the people that are the backbone of sustaining perpetual war is a much, much different and much, much less clear question.
Let's look at this next number, which I think is fascinating. 930,446 contractors are eligible to access classified information. This seems totally appalling to me. I can't believe there aren't more Snowdens and not more Chelsea Mannings.
It turns out that there's lots of stuff the government wants to do that it doesn't know how to do. So it goes out and hires people, ultimately like Edward Snowden, and trusts them with tremendous, tremendous amounts of your secrets.
Is this just a consequence of having no draft and then it just goes out to private contractors?
I was in a lot of combat in eastern Afghanistan with a platoon of airborne infantry, and they were really sort of appalled by the idea of a draft. They're like, listen, you don't want people up here who don't want to be here. You wouldn't have a draft for the fire department, you wouldn't have a draft for the police force. You can't drag people out here who don't want to be fighting and make them fight. It doesn't work.
Let's look at this next number, the ever-changing American military. Between 2002 and 2012, 250 manned fighter planes were retired by the U.S. Air Force. In that same period, 241 Predator, Reaper, and Global Hawk drones were added to the United States Air Force's squadron. How does this look from the position of a soldier?
I mean, I'm very concerned about this development. I think any time we build systems in which human beings are not the ones pulling triggers, when we don't understand the true cost of war, which is trauma and havoc, and it's an ugly business. I mean, the real cost of war is being felt by people back home who are struggling with their families, who are going through incredible amounts of heartache, trauma, divorce. That's the cost of war, to say nothing of the people on the ground overseas.
And I think there's a big mistake in the way this discussion is often contextualized. The drone isn't the issue. The issue is an air war. In places like Pakistan, US intelligence operatives are looking at patterns of behavior that they consider suspicious, that they consider consonant with terrorist activity. They're not looking at specific people. They're killing people who they literally do not know. They don't know anything about them. They're just assessing that they may be dangerous. That is a much, much, much more important thing to focus on than the platform of the thing doing the killing.
Yeah.
Many respectable journalists and analysts have suggested that perhaps an ulterior motivation is actually the protraction of this conflict in order to justify ever greater force projection around the world, right? Does it seem like, to an extent, at this point, we're in the business of manufacturing our own enemies?
How do our soldiers think about this? The guys, the people that you serve with, do they think things like this? Do they think that they're serving a good cause? This is for freedom and democracy? And
It's a complicated calculation for them. I refuse to cover Iraq. I thought Iraq was wrong. I thought it had nothing to do with 9/11. Afghanistan, I completely understood. I'd been going there since the mid-90s as a journalist. I live in New York City. 9/11 happened. I kind of got the connection, but I never once heard the troops debate the war ethically, morally, legally, strategically. They debated it tactically. What they talked about is mistakes that the command made in the prosecution of the war. Like, God, it's so stupid. Why would they do this instead of that? But it was on a very granular tactical level.
Let's look at this next number. Is the growth of the warfare state from 2004 to 2012. 1 in 6 permanent federal employees added was at the Department of Homeland Security. Today, it boasts 224,000 permanent employees. There's no control over spending and over the size of these agencies, are there?
What the Department of Homeland Security gives out is something like 60% larger every year in terms of money and allocations. They're giving it to places like Keene, New Hampshire, so they can buy armored vehicles to protect pumpkin festivals.
As a veteran going to veterans hospitals, even in the New York City area, and having to wait for appointments, being mistreated, especially as a woman veteran, that money could be siphoned into the Department of Veterans Affairs for folks who are actually serving this country.
The American military, the size of it has declined slightly, but let's look at this next number. 37% It's the U.S. share of global military spending. I mean, Spencer, if we shrink this number, shouldn't we all be terrified because Putin's military is rolling into Crimea and Ukraine? They're going to be the leaders. We need more money, right?
No. Vladimir Putin is never going to be the leader of the world. No one wants to bandwagon with Vladimir Putin. The same thing with the Chinese. The issue is more, when did anyone in this room decide that the United States ought to have, and consent to the idea that the US ought to have this outsized role in the world and inherited responsibilities? That never happened. This has happened in a slow process over 70 years where the United States has become the guarantor of world security by default and by autopilot, and it's not something that anyone in this room chose, and it's not something that we get put on the ballot each time. And unless the United States starts cultivating a debate over what responsibilities it wants, it's going to find that lots of other interests overseas are going to determine what the United States does.
All right, hi there. My name is Dan Bragolevsky. My question here is Russia and the occupation of Ukraine. If Russia proceeds in this manner, what is the cutoff point where we have to do something drastic?
Russia is a nuclear power. You really, really, really have to think carefully about if you want to place US military personnel in the way of an advancing, assaulting Russian military machine that's going to become, under Putin, as it has been, irredentist and seize territory. If the US is going to really do anything substantial about Ukraine, it's going to have to come over a tremendous amount of time and a tremendous amount of economic pain, which probably has a greater chance of pushing Russia out of Ukraine than anything else. On the other hand, does Vladimir Putin really care about the amount of pain inflicted on his own population suffering? You know, it's a really difficult thing. I'm not really sure I have an easy answer.
Let's move to our second topic, millennial veterans. And this first number, 167,756. That's the number of new recruits into the US military in 2013. You know, most of us have to admit that you know, military service appeals to people in the sort of lower rungs, lower economic rungs, and it's just an easy, they don't go to college, it's an easy thing for them to do. Is that true or not?
Actually, I mean, my time in the military, I thought it was the most diverse institution I've ever been a part of. Do lower income people disproportionately serve? Absolutely. Do people of color disproportionately serve? Absolutely. Among women veterans, African American women disproportionately serve. So there is absolutely, you know, kind of a lopsided demographic.
And Sebastian, these are not the people that are in your film. I mean, they're two
No, I
films
mean, that's the thing
actually.
is that, I mean, there's the military and then there are the combat units in the military. And I don't have the statistics in front of me, but at least the platoon that I was with, there was one African American. Most of the young men, it was all men, and most of them were middle class white guys, Latino guys. And they all, I mean, to a person, wanted to be in combat very badly. They had to pass a lot of tests that they easily could have failed if they did not want to be in combat. I think if they had just simply needed a job and wanted to avoid combat, there would have been a very simple thing to have happen.
The number that we just saw seemed fairly low to me of recruits for 2013. This might be why. This is something that I saw the other day, and we added this, you know, this number. 71% of young Americans would not qualify to enlist in the US military. The source on that is the Wall Street Journal. The actual source is from the military itself. So things like, you know, if you don't have a high school degree, if you have tattoos.
One huge reason for that is the level of obesity in American society. I mean, literally, people do not physically qualify to be in the US military today. And, you know, right now there are still restrictions on what women can do in the military. We have a pool of very qualified Americans, both men and women, who are willing to do this job. Instead, we seem to be siphoning these jobs off to contractors and other folks.
Camille Foster, the draft was mentioned several times as a solution to potential problems. It's strange, we have had a draft in this country in the past. Didn't work out particularly well. It's a system that can in fact be gamed and was. It also didn't prevent us from getting into frivolous wars. Is that really something we ought to be thinking about seriously, or should we be looking at actual remedies to perhaps preventing us from getting into wars of questionable merit?
I would say both. And so, you know, if I were sitting in Congress today, you know, the type of legislation I would consider putting together is more of a national service piece of legislation where it would encourage people to serve on many different levels. I mean, I do think that our country is suffering a kind of crisis of conscience on so many levels, and something is gained from some kind of national bond. You know, perhaps it's teaching in local schools in your area, perhaps it's, you know, joining some kind of medical corps. There's so many different options.
And what if you object as a citizen to having any portion of your life sort of drafted into service? I have a problem with that.
The cost right now of folks not being engaged in warfighting when we are engaged in so much warfighting, when our budget is so much geared toward that direction, that these types of measures are extremely sensible in reining us back in and focusing back on what's happening at home. If young people can be a part of that, then all the better. We have a moral responsibility to make sure that our bullets don't end up killing people who should not be killed overseas.
Let's look at this next number. 17% of homeless adults are veterans, but veterans only make up 9% of the total US population. Now, the second part of this stat is female veterans are 3 times more likely to be homeless than non-veterans. For male veterans, that's 2 times more likely. You know, you have the sense that it's a pretty good support system. This is the kind of myth in, I think, a lot of ways. That you get a salary, you get a pension, you have the VA. Why are so many veterans, and especially women, as we just saw, finding themselves in situations where they're homeless?
VA was unprepared for these wars. VA was unprepared for the incredible influx of veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. Women who are homeless, women veterans who are homeless, are impacted by sexual assault as well. We know that because we've seen the VA studies. About 1 in 3 homeless women veterans has been impacted by sexual assault in the military. So, you know, you've got post-traumatic stress and other conditions impacting veterans, both male and female, not just from combat, but from rape and sexual assault in the military. So there are a lot of factors at work here.
And many of them use this for things like PTSD. So let's look at this next number. More than half of Americans think the majority of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans suffer from PTSD. But the maximum estimated rate of PTSD among those veterans is 20%. How bad is this right now after fighting America's longest war in Afghanistan, a brutal war in Iraq, and these sort of never-ending other little skirmishes here?
I'm actually writing about that for Vanity Fair right now, and I'm comparing rates of PTSD in different cultures, different societies. And I started to interview anthropologists about warfare around the world, and oddly, what I found was that in Israel, the rate is 1%. And what seems to determine PTSD isn't what happens in war. PTSD is determined by the kind of society you come home to. And the more cohesive the society is, the more sort of communal the national effort is, the lower the rates of trauma.
This disorder, as it's called, PTSD, there's a huge discussion in the veterans and the psychiatric and medical community about the clinical term PTSD. We don't even use it in our segment of the veterans population. We talk about post-traumatic stress because there's nothing disordered about being traumatized from having pulled a trigger, from having killed people or seen your loved ones being killed. That is a normal human reaction. I mean, we could talk about post-traumatic stress injury. If you are not stressed out as a result of being in war, I think then there's something wrong with you.
Are there any veterans here? Any veterans in the audience? What branch of the service are you in?
The Army.
When you were out of the military, how was that apparatus for you?
Their first instinct is to ask, like, who your sponsor is, because it still hasn't quite sunk in that, like, the woman coming to the hospital might be the person who's a service member. That I might not be using my husband's benefits, that I might actually be the soldier. I think if I'd been maybe a man or been carrying like a child who was a service member's child, I might have gotten much, much better treatment. But like I was 35 and they would kind of talk down to me like, well, you can't just make appointments anytime you want.
You know, again, we're not surprised by this. This is just another year in the life of the VA, this sprawling bureaucracy that does not care for veterans, either in terms of the healthcare apparatus or the benefits apparatus.
Well, let's look at this as another depressing number. 378 days, that's the average time the VA takes to complete a disability claim. We have scandals about this. It makes the newspaper. I can pull this from the GAO report. Why is nothing done about it?
Well, remarkably, that's an improvement over time. Veterans advocates who have been grilling our elected officials day in and day out the last 10 years about this. I mean, we've been grilling them on military sexual assault and harassment claims as well. Because if you talk about that, the post-traumatic stress related to sexual violence in the military, I mean, those claims are even harder to get past. Every era has its fair share of problems within VA in terms of what claims are passed or which ones are rejected. And this will repeat itself year after year after year until we actually believe veterans.
Here's a naive question that I still can't figure out how to answer. Why can't you just shift the veteran population over to Obamacare? Like, as a matter of healthcare policy, you need young people in Obamacare to make it work, to tip the balance, and you need to fix the VA. Like, why not just take that huge population, have the government pay for the premiums, and stick them in Obamacare? Like,
unless somebody objects to this during the question, or you solved the problem. Sebastian, you've solved an enormous problem.
I'm so glad I came today.
This is why we're here, to you to come and we can solve public policy problems. Our final number here, $35,367. The median income for veterans, that's $9,762, higher than in the general population. Just on a sort of dollars and cents level, it's a reasonable career option, isn't it?
We shouldn't overlook, the military does provide you with skills that become tremendously valuable to employers. You know how to be on time. You know how to do things on budget. You know how to be, focused on a goal.
Anu, was a career choice for you in 1999. You're very active in some of the problems that plague veterans. Is it a decision that you regret in any way, or are you happy to be a Marine?
No, I was happy to be. I love being a Marine. I'm still kind of a Marine. I think it's a great job for young people. You've got 3 square meals a day. You've got dental. You've got medical. As far as women serving, I would like to see a fairer military based on meritocracy and not sexism, and one in which sexual predators are actually put behind bars. And we've got a long way to go with those 2 issues. But it's a better military today than it was 10 years ago.
Hi, I'm Julia Piker. I just have a question. How has the threat of militant Islam changed national defense at a budgetary level?
Just all the way up.
You weren't raising your hand. You were just saying it's like a huge budget.
Just more money, more and more fear-mongering, more and more initiatives that would never have happened. Like dragnet surveillance of all American phone records. Security theater like you see at airports. This would have been unthinkable absent 9/11. The idea that surreptitiously, without any debate, and without legal authorization, a law designed in the 1970s to protect American privacy from a surveillance state would just be completely thrown out the window, and the NSA super empowered to focus not abroad, but at home on each and every phone call that you make and the records of it, collecting a giant dragnet, which is still ongoing to this day.
I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Sebastian, Spencer, and Anu, for joining us today. And thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time on The Business of Life.
Business of Life is made possible by Better Money Habits. It's a free resource that helps you build practical knowledge and take control of your finances. Powered by Bank of America. See more at bettermoneyhabits.com.